You might wonder, is healing really worth it if it can cost friendships, relationships, connections, comfort? Is it really worth it? Well, the answer depends on what you are willing to sacrifice. Welcome to the Infinite Carousel. My name is Promise, and here we talk about real growth, the messy, the beautiful, the imperfect kind. Most people think healing will improve their relationships. That once they become more self-aware, emotionally healthy, more confident, more authentic, everything around them will naturally get better. And sometimes it does. But there's a side of healing that most people never or hardly talk about. A side that can feel confusing and deeply painful, and sometimes even cruel. Because healing doesn't just change how you feel about yourself, it changes how you relate to everyone else around you. When you start changing, something unexpected happens. Certain relationships begin to feel different, conversations are uncomfortable, dynamics start to shift. Tension appears where there was once harmony. People who once felt close suddenly feel distant. And you start wondering, what happened? What happened to us? What happened to our friendship? What happened to our connection? But maybe the more important question to ask is, what happened to me? Because sometimes relationships don't fall apart because you're healing incorrectly or you're not doing it right. Sometimes they fall apart because they were built on the version of you that no longer exists. And that is a heartbreaking realization. Because one of the hardest truths about personal growth is that some relationships only function when you abandon yourself. Every relationship has rules, unwritten and unspoken rules. We have these invisible agreements with other people. You don't consciously sit down and write them down. And you don't negotiate them. They simply develop over time. Maybe you took on the role of being the peacemaker, the listener, the helper, the one who never says no. Or maybe you're the one who absorbs everyone else's emotions, the one who keeps the peace, the one who makes sure that everyone is comfortable, everyone is happy. You never ask for too much. The one who's always staying small enough to make everyone comfortable. But after years of playing that role, I can relate to this very well because I've been that person, the one who's always trying to make everyone comfortable, make everyone feel important. After years of playing that role, people stop seeing it as something you do. They start seeing it as something that you are. That role becomes your identity, not just in their eyes, but in your eyes too. Then you start healing. And when the healing begins, disruption happens. Healing is very disruptive. It's uncomfortable because it asks you the uncomfortable questions. Why do I feel responsible for everyone else's happiness? Why am I afraid to disappoint people? Why do I apologize for having needs? Why do I keep abandoning myself to maintain relationships? And the moment you begin to ask those questions, these old contracts will start to break. They fall apart. Not because you're becoming selfish, but because you are becoming conscious. You are becoming conscious of the patterns, of the role that you've been playing. Let's talk about the version of you they loved. One of the most painful discoveries in healing is realizing that some of these people were attached to your wounds. They were not attached to you. the people pleasing you, the overgiving you, the lack of boundaries you, the person who was endlessly available, the emotional labor and the self-sacrifice. When those behaviors disappear, some relationships will suddenly lose their foundation. This doesn't necessarily mean that those people are evil. It sometimes means that they were accustomed to a certain dynamic in the relationship, a dynamic that benefited them, a dynamic that felt normal. This is a dynamic where your needs remained invisible. And when you begin honoring yourself, they experience it as a loss. You are not hurting them. It's not because you're hurting them, but because they no longer have access to the version of you that neglected themselves to make everyone else comfortable. And this is where healing becomes confusing. Because the healthier you become, the more resistance you sometimes encounter. You expected an applause for healing, right? But instead, you got distance. You expected support, but instead, you got criticism. You expected understanding, but instead, you got guilt tripping. And suddenly, healing feels less empowering. It feels lonely. Growth creates mirrors. When you start changing, you unintentionally become a mirror. Your growth reflects possibilities that other people may not be ready to face. Your boundaries force others to examine theirs. Your self-respect highlights where they have abandoned themselves. And your authenticity challenges their performance. Your courage exposes their fear, and people react differently when they are confronted with mirrors. Some people will become inspired, and some people will become defensive. Not because you have done something wrong, but because growth has a strange way of making hidden things visible. The version of you that stayed silent, that never challenged anyone. The healed version does. Not through aggression, not through judgment, but simply through existence, just being. And that can make people uncomfortable and defensive, especially if the relationships relied on patterns that remained unconscious. Healing feels like grief. Nobody talks enough about the grief of becoming healthier. We imagine healing as a process of gaining more peace, gaining more clarity, gaining more confidence, more freedom. And it is a process of gaining, but healing is also a process of losing. You are losing the illusions. You lose the old identities. You lose the coping mechanisms, and you lose certainty. And sometimes you lose people who were never meant to be in your life. People you genuinely love. People who were important to you. People who helped to shape your life. That loss hurts. Healing doesn't magically erase attachment. You can know a relationship is unhealthy and still miss it. You can understand why something ended and you still cry over it. You can outgrow someone and still love them. That's what makes healing so emotionally complicated. It's not always about choosing good and bad. Sometimes it's choosing between familiar and healthy. And those are very different things. The loneliness of becoming yourself. There is a phase of healing that feels incredibly lonely. It is the strange in-between space. You're no longer who you used to be, but you're not fully who you're becoming either. And this is the space where I am currently in my life. The old environments feel different. Old habits feel different. Everything familiar feels, it loses its emotional grip. And for a while, it can feel like you are floating, like you are disconnected. You feel uncertain, you feel alone. Many people mistake this phase for failure. They think, maybe I was happier before. Maybe I should have continued with the same patterns, the same habits, the same lifestyle. Maybe I should go back. Maybe I'm changing too much. But often what's happening is very simple. You're experiencing the loneliness that comes from no longer betraying yourself. And that's unfamiliar. It's unfamiliar territory. Self-abandonment often provides belonging, and authenticity sometimes removes it temporarily. Not everyone can come with you. We all know this. This is perhaps one of the hardest truths to swallow, the hardest truths in personal growth. Not everyone can come with you. And that doesn't make you a mean person or you think you're better than them. It doesn't mean they are worse than you. Growth is not a hierarchy, it's direction. People evolve differently, at different speeds, in different seasons. Sometimes two people simply stop growing in the same direction. One person grows this way and the other person grows that way. And no amount of love can overcome that reality. Because relationships require more than affection. They require alignment. And alignment means mutual growth, shared values, emotional availability, and the willingness to evolve. Without those things, even genuine love can struggle. It can struggle to survive, and accepting this can be devastating. Sometimes love remains while compatibility disappears. There's a difference between love and attachment. Healing has taught me a distinction that I wouldn't have learned any other way. Love and attachment are not the same thing. Attachment says, I need you to stay exactly who you are or who you've always been. But love says, I want you to become the best version of you. I want you to become who you're meant to be. Attachment fears change. Love makes room for it. Attachment clings, but love allows. Attachment will demand, but love will respect. This is why some relationships survive healing beautifully and others don't. Healthy relationships adapt, they evolve, they make space for growth. Unhealthy relationships, they often demand preservation. They need you to remain predictable and manageable and familiar. So the moment you stop being those things, conflict begins. Not because you're becoming difficult, but because you are becoming real. You are becoming your authentic self. Finally, the unexpected reward. After all this, you might wonder, is healing really worth it if it can cost friendships, relationships, connections, comfort? Is it really worth it? Well, the answer depends on what you are willing to sacrifice. The alternative also has a cost. The cost of staying small, the cost of staying silent, the cost of suppressing your needs, the cost of living a life that isn't truly yours. Many people avoid losing relationships, and in the process, they lose themselves. So, healing will ask you something different. It will ask you to stop negotiating your identity for acceptance. Healing will ask you to stop shrinking for belonging, to stop performing for love. And yes, some relationships may fall away, but the ones that remain, they become something really beautiful, something extraordinary. Relationships where you can be honest, relationships where boundaries are not seen as punishment, relationships where growth isn't a threat, relationships where your authenticity is welcomed, it's not tolerated. And perhaps most importantly, you begin building a relationship with yourself. One that no longer depends on abandonment. One that no longer requires pretending. One that no longer demands suffering as proof of love. If you're currently losing people because you're becoming healthier, because you are setting boundaries, because you are speaking honestly, because you no longer carry responsibilities that were never yours, this can feel really painful. I know it can. I've been through it. I know it can feel confusing. And I know there may be moments when you question whether healing is really worth the cost. But I want you to remember this. The people who truly love you may need some time to adjust. The people who benefited from your self-abandonment may resist. And some people may leave entirely. Those were not your people to begin with. Anyone who requires you to betray yourself in order to keep them was never asking for love. They were asking for access. Healing doesn't always reveal who loves you. Sometimes healing reveals the version of you that was willing to disappear. And that distinction changes everything, because the goal of healing was never to become more acceptable. The goal was to become more whole, more of yourself. And wholeness requires letting go of relationships that only survived because pieces of you were missing. If this resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Have you ever lost a relationship because you started healing? I'd love to hear your experience, and if you're interested in more conversations about identity, emotional growth, psychology, and the hidden patterns shaping our lives, subscribe to the Infinite Carousel. Until next time, take care of yourself and don't abandon yourself just to be loved.